Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical-ish. This is Ancient Mysteries, Volume 2, Episode 4, going over the second half of the second tier. Let's jump right into it. Number 1, the mystery of the Sumerian King List. The Sumerian King List is an ancient manuscript that records the kings of Sumer and neighboring dynasties in ancient southern Iraq. It is unique in the fact that it blends mythical pre-dynastic rulers with historical rulers known to have existed in real life. The first fragment, a 4,000-year-old cuneiform tablet, was discovered in the early 1900s by German-American scholar Hermann Hilprecht. He found this at the ancient site of Nippur, and since then, at least 18 other examples have been found, with the most extensive version being the Weld-Blundell prism in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The Sumerian King List itself is a very valuable archaeological find because it reflects old traditions and also provides the chronological framework for the different periods of kingship within ancient Sumeria. The list starts off with the origin of kingship, seen as the divine institution, and the rulers in the earliest dynasties are represented as reigning for incredibly long periods of time. Some of these rulers, such as Etana, Lugalbanda, and even Gilgamesh, are mythical or legendary figures with heroic feats documented in Sumerian and Babylonian narrative compositions. The list does name 8 kings who ruled for a total of 241,200 years before the Great Flood, after which the kingship was then transferred over to, humanity itself. Obviously, for 8 people to reign for 241,000 years is a little bit of a stretch, but that's exactly what the mystery deals with. The extremely long tenures of the early kings have provoked various interpretations of who these people actually were. They range from a complete dismissal as artificial and even mythological, to even the belief that they were gods that were actually living on Earth and capable of living much longer than humans. Another perspective is that they're just allegorical and represent relative power, triumph, or importance, with each king personifying one of them. The Sumerian King List also demonstrates remarkable parallels to accounts in Genesis and other flood myths, especially with the connection of the decrease of longevity of humans over time. I did find one interesting theory about the Sumerian King List and its connection to sacred geometry, so I thought I'd share. Sacred geometry itself is just a concept that attributes symbolic and sacred meanings to certain geometric shapes and proportions. It is found in architecture and art of various cultures and is often associated with spiritual beliefs and the understanding of the nature of the universe. Obviously, the connection between the Sumerian King List and sacred geometry is largely speculative, but it is based on a few key points. The first one is the unusually long reigns of the kings. Like I mentioned before, some of these kings reigned for several tens of thousands of years. This has led some researchers to suggest that these numbers may have had a symbolic meaning, possibly related to sacred geometry or other esoteric concepts. On the flip side of that, mainstream scholars believe that these figures could be exaggerations, errors, or might have been influenced by the ancient Sumerian base 60 numeric system. The second point is that the list is divided into 2 king categories, those who ruled before the Great Flood and those who ruled after it. This division has been interpreted by some as evidence for an ancient advanced civilization that was destroyed by a global catastrophe, and some researchers have then suggested that this specific civilization may have been aware of sacred geometry principles, which could have been used in their architecture and knowledge systems. And then there is just the general connection to ancient knowledge. Proponents of the connection between the Sumerian King List and sacred geometry argue that the list provides evidence of an advanced civilization that possessed knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and other sciences. This is based on the assumption that the long reigns of kings indicate a level of knowledge and sophistication far beyond what was typical for the time. Obviously, there's not a lot of evidence to suggest this, other than maybe something that I'll cover later in this video, which is the Sumerian knowledge of the solar system, which is a little interesting and might be a little bit blown out of proportion. But the King List itself, in my opinion, is a fantastic archaeological find. It does show mythology as well as actual known kings, so it is a fascinating piece of archaeological evidence. Personally, I'm not a fan of sacred geometry. There's a lot of things that are true, but in general, a lot of people like to just make random assumptions and combine random numbers to get random ratios that then connect it to other random ratios, and in my opinion are creating significance out of something that isn't very significant, but that's just my opinion. Number 2, Noah's Ark in Mount Ararat. Noah's Ark is obviously the well-known story from the Hebrew Bible, which can also be found in the religious texts of Christianity and Islam. The story revolves around a man named Noah who was instructed by God to build a massive ship known as the Ark in order to save his family and a pair of every species of animal from a catastrophic flood. The flood itself was sent by God, and it was meant to cleanse the earth of its wickedness and corruption. And once the floodwaters receded, the Ark is said to have come to a rest on top of a mountain, with Mount Ararat being the most popular proposed location. The Ark, according to the Bible, was a massive wooden vessel with specific dimensions. It is said to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. A cubit itself is an ancient unit of measurement roughly equivalent to 18 inches, which would make the Ark approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The Ark was then divided into 3 decks and was designed to accommodate Noah's family, as well as every single animal on Earth. Oh, as well as food supplies, of course. One of the most popular theories is that the Ark came to rest on top of Mount Ararat, which is a snow-capped dormant volcano situated in modern-day Turkey. It is actually the highest peak in Turkey, and it stands at an elevation of about 16,000 to 17,000 feet, and the theory itself is primarily based on the biblical verse in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, which states that the Ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. It is important to note, however, that the term Ararat in the Bible refers to a region and not a specific mountain, which is pretty interesting. Obviously, throughout history, there have been countless expeditions and searches for physical evidence of the Ark, not only on Mount Ararat, but all over the globe. Several sightings and claims of finding the Ark or its remains have been made, but none of them have been definitively proven or accepted by the scientific community. A lot of the claims are based on aerial or satellite images that show the outline of a large structure, but these findings are obviously disputed from the people who actually go to these sites and study the aerial footage. One notable claim was dated in 2010 after a research team claimed to find 7 large wooden compartments buried at about 13,000 feet above sea level near the peak of Mount Ararat. The team says that radiocarbon dated wood taken from the site shows that the wood is about 4,800 years old, which coincides roughly with the time of Noah's flood in the Bible. It is interesting, though, that even young Earth creationists are skeptical of the age of the wood, since they believe that since the Earth is 6,000 years old, that the radiocarbon dating needs to be recalibrated, and that this would mean that this specific wood would be way too young, because they like to say that something that is 60,000 years old radiocarbon dated would actually be about 6,000 years old. So if something is dated 4,800 years old, then it would be significantly too young to be actually part of Noah's Ark. Also, if you subscribe to the theory that a lot of the flood myths we see around the ancient world are a product of the Younger Dryas impact, which happened significantly before the so-called date of this wood, then it wouldn't fit into that time period. Anyways, for this claim specifically, not a lot of research has been done around it, but theoretically, this structure could be a variety of different things from church to storage to, I guess, Noah's Ark, but who knows. Number 3, the unfinished obelisk. Aswan, Egypt is one of the quarries that the ancient Egyptians used to produce the granite that was then used for the construction of many different structures across their civilization. The unfinished obelisk is not really known who commissioned it, but it is believed to have been commissioned during the 18th dynasty, and it was intended to be one of a pair of obelisks, which were often erected at the entrance of temples as symbols of the divine and the sun god Ra. Had it been completed, the obelisk would have stood around 42 meters tall, which is about 137 feet high, and weighed nearly 1,200 tons. This would make it the largest obelisk ever erected in ancient Egypt. The obelisk was not finished and left still attached to the original bedrock due to the cracks that began to form during construction, and it can still be seen half-finished in Aswan, Egypt. Obviously, due to its massive size and weight, one of the main mysteries around the obelisk is how they would have moved such massive rocks. And this doesn't even go on to the theory about the actual construction techniques itself, considering that granite is an extremely difficult rock to cut precisely, and the ancient Egyptians did it perfectly. So here are just a few of the theories surrounding how they would have moved such a massive object. One popular theory that I'm sure you've heard of is that the ancient Egyptians used large wooden rollers to transport the massive stones. So essentially, the workers would place the stones on a sled-like structure and then roll it over the wooden rollers, which were laid on the ground in a line. And as the stones moved forward, the workers would take the rollers from the back and then move them to the front, creating a continuous rolling path. This obviously would have taken a massive number of workers, especially for something that weighed 1,200 tons. Another theory suggests that the Egyptians built lubricated slipways to transport the stones. They would construct a long sloping track made of mud and water, which acted as a lubricant, reducing the friction between the stone and the ground. Workers would then drag the massive stones on sleds along these slipways, and even experiments conducted by modern engineers have demonstrated that this method could be effective in moving large stones with minimal labor, but I think we would have seen evidence of this being constructed between Aswan and the cities that would then take these boulders. Some other researchers propose that the ancient Egyptians used a series of levers and fulcrums to move the stones. They would essentially place a large wooden beam under the stone and use it as a lever to lift the stone, creating a gap beneath it. They would then insert a wooden fulcrum underneath the stone and push the lever down to move the stone forward. This process would be repeated multiple times to cover its desired distance. I think this one gets a little bit of backlash because of the massive amount of distance between the actual quarry and where they erected all these monuments. So it would have taken way too much labor and way too much time to get these stones to their desired locations. And then there's also the water transportation theory, which suggests that the Egyptians relied on the Nile River to construct large wooden barges and carefully load the stones onto them. Now, I think this is pretty accurate for, smaller stones, but something that weighs 1,200 tons would be very difficult to load onto a massive barge and keep the center of gravity perfectly in the center without it sinking or tipping the boat over. So what's interesting about this is all these theories have their own flaws and fallbacks, and I think that it is interesting to see who supports what, and I really want to see more research done on this and the time that it would actually take to do this, not only for this obelisk, but for the pyramids itself and some of the other massive stone structures that were quarried, moved thousands of miles, and then put in place. Number 4, what does Selah exactly mean? Selah is a Hebrew word found in the Hebrew Bible 74 times, particularly in the Psalms. Its exact meaning is uncertain as it has never been fully explained or defined. However, scholars have proposed several interpretations of the word based on the context and the use in the text itself. Some believe that Selah may have been an instruction for musicians, choir directors, or worshipers, possibly indicating a pause, a change in the music, or simply just a moment of reflection. It could also represent a pause for meditation or contemplation on the words of the previous passage. This interpretation is supported by the fact that Selah often appears at the end of a verse or stanza in the Psalms. And then some others simply think that it was just an expression of affirmation. Selah could serve as a similar word to saying amen or so be it in response to the preceding passage. Other than that, we don't really know what else it could mean, so I think we're just going to leave it at that. Number 5, the Babylonian Map of the World. The Babylonian Map of the World, also known as the Imago Mundi, is an ancient artifact that dates back to the 6th century BC. It is one of the earliest known maps of the world and provides pretty valuable insight into the Babylonian civilization's understanding of geography as well as cosmology. The map is drawn on a clay tablet which was discovered in the late 19th century by archaeologist Hormuzd Rassam in the ancient site of Sippar. And of course, it is currently housed in the British Museum. The tablet features a depiction of the Mesopotamian world with Babylon at its center. It's engraved with images and cuneiform inscriptions all across the map. Babylon itself is encircled by 2 concentric circles symbolizing the ocean, referred to as the bitter water or the salt sea, and the map is labeled with Babylon, Assyria, and Elam. Surrounding the salt sea are 8 triangular areas called regions or islands, and they are actually annotated with distances, descriptions, and they also put accounts of legendary heroes and mythical creatures that inhabit these specific territories. The southern marshes are represented by 2 parallel lines at the map's bottom, while a curved line near the top depicts the Zagros Mountains. The Euphrates River is illustrated flowing from the mountains above, passing through Babylon and extending to the marshes below, and within the map center there are 7 labeled areas that seem to represent cities. Due to the tablet's damage, it appears that 3 islands are actually missing from the lower corner. The map is believed to represent the entire world, and its distinctiveness lies in the inclusion of the islands beyond the ocean. All other maps from the same era were localized to the area of creation and did not actually feature land beyond the ocean, as the ocean was considered the end of all lands. So it was interesting to see this cultural viewpoint that the Babylonians held. Obviously, the true intention of the map's creation is debated. This is because numerous locations are accurately depicted and some are not. So a lot of people argue that this is just a representation of the Babylonian perspective of the mythological world itself. The 18 mythical creatures described in the map's inscriptions reference the Babylonian epic of creation, where the new world emerged after these beings were banished to the heavenly ocean. And conversely, others suggest that the Babylonians engaged in cartography to aid in exporting their agricultural surplus. Although the Babylonians were familiar with other cultures such as the Persians and Egyptians, the map's creators deliberately omitted these groups, which I find pretty funny. And Babylon's position on the map indicates that the Babylonians considered themselves the center of the world and everything around them to just be satellite and less important. It does raise a lot of questions about the Babylonian viewpoint on the world, because they essentially would either make this stuff up in the mythological realm, or it would mean that they would have had to travel there, which is a lot more unlikely, but still an interesting thought. Number 6, who were the Xiongnu? The Xiongnu were a confederation of nomadic tribes that inhabited the eastern Eurasian steppe, primarily in the regions corresponding to modern-day Mongolia, Siberia, and parts of northern China. They emerged as a powerful political and military force in the late 3rd century BC and remained influential until the early 1st century CE. They are most well known for their interactions with the Han dynasty of China, as they posed a significant threat to the Chinese Empire due to their frequent raids and invasions. And in response to their invasions, the Han dynasty initiated a series of military campaigns and even began construction of the Great Wall of China. They were organized in a hierarchical system with a supreme leader known as the Xiongnu at the top, and the Xiongnu himself held both military and political power over the various tribes within the confederation. The Xiongnu society was primarily based on the pastoral nomadism, which involved raising livestock such as sheep, horses, and camels, and moving periodically in search of fresh pasture. During the 1st century CE, the Xiongnu confederation began to suffer from internal divisions, leadership struggles, and power struggles among the various tribes within the confederation, and this fragmentation weakened their military and political power, making them a lot more vulnerable to external pressures. These external pressures came in the form of the Xianbei and Roran, which were also these nomadic groups that began to gradually displace the Xiongnu from their traditional territories and reduce their influence. At the same time of this power shift, the Han dynasty of China, which had been in conflict with the Xiongnu for centuries, took advantage of this internal turmoil and pursued a more aggressive policy against them. The Chinese engaged in diplomatic efforts to establish alliances with the rival tribes and launched military campaigns to weaken the Xiongnu further. After this, they essentially disappeared from the history books, and we are really unsure of what happened to them. Now, obviously, the disappearance is explainable and documented through the Chinese perspective, but the mystery surrounding the Xiongnu is definitely more dealt with the origins and the ethnicity of them. The precise origins and ethnic identity of the Xiongnu are still debated. Some scholars propose that they were of Turkic or Mongolic origin, while others argue for a connection to, honestly, a whole list of different language families. But since there is a lack of concrete evidence, such as a well-preserved written record, it makes it difficult to essentially determine and trace their exact origins. There is very limited information on the Xiongnu language, as they left behind very few written records, and what little evidence exists does come from, like I mentioned before, the Chinese historical texts and inscriptions on artifacts, which obviously they were not very favorable of the Xiongnu. One of the most debated questions is whether the Xiongnu had any connection to the Huns, which emerged in Europe in the 4th and 5th centuries CE. Some historians argue that they were related, with the Xiongnu possibly being the eastern ancestors of the Huns. However, there is very little evidence to support this, because it's also kind of just hard to test in general. Number 7, the Mugatta'at. The Mugatta'at are a group of seemingly unrelated, disconnected, or abbreviated letters that appear at the beginning of 29 chapters of the Quran. These chapters make up almost 1/3 of the Quran, and the Mugatta'at have essentially just confused people for centuries. The term Mugatta'at itself can be translated as disjointed letters or abbreviated letters, and there are 14 distinct letters within the Mugatta'at, which are here. These letters are combined in various ways to form 14 unique combinations known as the Huruf Mugatta'at, or the disjointed letters. These combinations appear at the beginning of the respective chapters and are written as single or multiple letters. And obviously, since we don't know what they mean, it has led to a lot of debate about what they mean. So let's just get into some of the theories. The first one being the cryptic or esoteric meaning. A lot of people believe that the Mugatta'at carry a hidden or secret meaning known only to God and perhaps the Prophet Muhammad. This view suggests that the letters serve as a reminder of the divine nature of the Quran and its incomprehensibility to humans. Another theory states that the Mugatta'at serve as an attention-grabbing device, which would capture the reader's attention and curiosity at the beginning of the chapter, which would then encourage further exploration and contemplation of the following text. Some people also think that it may be some sort of mnemonic device, possibly to help people memorize the Quran or to distinguish between the different chapters. And then another thing that's interesting, some scholars have proposed that the Mugatta'at might be a connection or reference to previous revelations, such as the Torah or the Gospel, which were written in different languages but also used similar abbreviations. So that connection could be pretty interesting if proven to be true. But other than that, we don't really know much else other than that they're just a grouping of random letters. And then there's my favorite theory, which the Mugatta'at are just a random grouping of letters meant to confuse, and essentially somebody just wrote them down in the goal of just being a troll. Number 8, how the Sumerians knew this much about our solar system. The Sumerians were one of the first civilizations to study the night sky, and they made several important contributions to early astronomy. The Sumerians were aware of the existence of at least 5 planets in our solar system: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And a lot of people argue that they had up to a knowledge of 10 of these celestial bodies. They referred to these planets as wandering stars because they moved against the background or fixed stars, and they also observed and recorded the positions of the moon and the sun, which would then go on to play a crucial role in their religious and agricultural practices. The Sumerians identified and named various constellations, which we are still using today, such as the Lion, the Scorpion, and the Great Twins. They used these constellations as a reference points for navigation and even timekeeping. The Sumerians developed one of the earliest known lunar calendars, which is actually pretty interesting. It's based on the moon's phase, and the calendar consisted of 12 months, each comprising of roughly 29.5 days. To account for the discrepancy between the lunar calendar and the solar year, they added an extra month approximately every 3 years, and this system was even later adopted by other civilizations, including the Babylonians. The Sumerians believed that the movements of celestial bodies had a direct influence on human affairs, and they developed a form of astrology that associated the planets and stars with their gods. And they believed that the positions of these celestial bodies could be used to predict and explain events on Earth. Sumerian priests, known as Ludals, would study the sky and record omens based on their observations. Now, how was all of this possible? I mean, obviously a lot of it dealt with religion, but the rest of it does show that the Sumerians were skilled in mathematics, and they applied this mathematical knowledge to the study of the heavens. They used a base 60 number system, which enabled them to make precise calculations of the positions and movements of the celestial bodies. Now, I read a lot of claims that said that the Sumerians knew of around 10 celestial bodies, including the asteroid belt, which wouldn't make much sense unless they had access to a telescope. So if this were the case, then something would have had to have gone on during this time period, but there isn't much real evidence to support this. If anybody is familiar with this specific theory, please let me know down in the comments. It's pretty interesting, but I couldn't find any real evidence to support it. Number 9, the Heslington Brain. The Heslington Brain is a remarkable archaeological find discovered in 2008 during excavations at the site of the University of York's Heslington East campus in North Yorkshire, England. It is essentially an extremely well-preserved human brain dating back to the Iron Age around 2,500 years ago. The preservation of the brain tissue, given its organic and extremely delicate nature, is obviously extraordinary and a very unique occurrence in archaeological contexts. The Heslington Brain was found inside the skull, which was part of a decapitated head uncovered in a waterlogged pit. The skull belonged to an individual who most likely was in his late 20s or early 30s at the time of death. Researchers believe that the individual was a victim of ritualistic or ceremonial decapitation, which was not an uncommon practice during the Iron Age. The brain stands out, obviously, for its exceptional preservation. It has its folding structure and even blood vessels still clearly visible, and the preservation itself is attributed to several factors, including the rapid burial of the skull in the waterlogged pit, which created an oxygen-free environment. This prevented the growth of microbes that would typically lead to decomposition, and researchers also think that the brain's natural proteins and fats might have contributed to the preservation by forming a resistant soap-like substance. The Heslington Brain has provided researchers with a rare opportunity to study ancient brain tissue, and upon analysis, scientists discovered that the brain has a similar structure and organization to modern human brains, indicating a degree of evolutionary stability in our neural anatomy. The brain's cellular structure, however, has not been preserved, which does limit the extent of scientific analysis that can be conducted, but it's still an extraordinary find. Number 10. What Pope Leo said to Attila the Hun. The meeting between Pope Leo I, also known as Leo the Great, and Attila the Hun in 452 AD is an important event in history as it marks the turning point in the relationship between the Roman Empire and the Hunnic Empire. The interaction between these two powerful figures has been the subject of much debate and speculation because there is no evidence to support what Pope Leo said to Attila the Hun to save Rome from destruction. Attila the Hun was the ruler of the Hunnic Empire, which was a vast and powerful confederation of tribes that stretched from modern-day Germany to the Ural River in Russia. Attila, who ruled from 434 to 453 AD, was renowned for his military prowess and led his forces in numerous campaigns across Europe, earning the name the Scourge of God. In 452 AD, Attila invaded Italy, intending to sack Rome as part of his campaign against the Western Roman Empire. This invasion was likely motivated by a desire for plunder and territory, as well as a sense of revenge against the Romans for their perceived treachery in breaking treaties and alliances. With the Huns at the doorstep of Rome, Pope Leo I, who served as the Bishop of Rome from 440 to 461 AD, took it upon himself to confront Attila and plead for the safety of Rome. The exact details of the meeting are unknown, but what is known is that Leo was accompanied by two high-ranking Roman officials who met Attila near the Mincio River in northern Italy. Now, before we get into the theories, what I think is also fascinating is the historical significance of this meeting itself. Leo's diplomatic efforts were successful as Attila agreed to withdraw his forces from Italy and not attack Rome. This marked a very rare instance of a non-military resolution to a conflict during a period that was vastly characterized by warfare and conquest. The encounter also demonstrated the growing influence of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church in political and diplomatic affairs. Leo's success in persuading Attila to spare Rome was seen as evidence of divine intervention and essentially bolstered the authority and prestige of the papacy, and you would then see the Roman Catholic Church to even now hold significant power and influence around the world. And Attila's decision to withdraw from Italy also marked the beginning of the decline of the Hunnic Empire. After his death in 453 AD, the empire rapidly disintegrated and the various tribes that comprised it eventually assimilated into other cultures or formed new confederations. And I would argue that this meeting is one of the most important times in human history. Now, there are several theories about what transpired during the meeting between Pope Leo and Attila the Hun. Some accounts, like I mentioned, particularly from religious sources, suggest that the Pope's eloquence and the power of his faith made such an impression on Attila that he was compelled to spare Rome. Some even claim that St. Peter and St. Paul appeared alongside Leo, convincing Attila to retreat. Without even talking about the claim of St. Peter and St. Paul appearing alongside Leo, I find the first part of the Pope's eloquence and power of his faith making an impression on Attila just extremely hard to believe. Secular historians, however, argue that the meeting was a strategic negotiation with Leo and the Roman officials offering Attila tribute, hostages, or other concessions in exchange for the safety of Rome, but there is very little evidence of them actually giving Attila anything, so that's also up for debate. And then some theories just suggest that Attila's decision to withdraw was influenced by factors such as the difficulty of maintaining supply lines within Italy and the risk of disease, or the prospect of facing a very large Roman military counteroffensive, which in my opinion I think he could have taken, but I guess Attila just wanted to go home. Well, that wraps up today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to my patrons, Beanfart, Jag, Aliens Built Everything, and Dates and Dead Guys, who Dates and Dead Guys actually has a fantastic YouTube channel. If you haven't seen him, definitely go check him out. But anyways, thank you to my patrons for supporting me. I really do appreciate it. If you want to come chat with all of us, head over to our Discord server. There'll be a link down in the description. So definitely come check it out. Come hang. We'd love to have you. At the very least, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.